This is a very interesting episode, what we will have today. And I'm very pleased that I have Bill High on the other end at this time in this interview. And the story is actually, I've got a very interesting book, and the book is called The Legacy Life. And for all the listeners and viewers, I will put the link for the book in the show notes. And it was fascinating to read for me. And one sentence in the book catched my attention just for a second. And this sentence was, time should be measured by the generation. And this sentence come from Jay Hughes. Bill, you know him, I know him, and he is a great guide for us at Advisors in this family of wealth. And before we jump in the book and on the other topics, can you give us just what was the main reason that you have, as a co-author together with David Green, have wrote this kind of book on legacy?
Yeah, glad to jump in on all that. So just a little bit of quick background. I practice law. So you probably appreciate that I have the best lawyer name ever, Bill High.
Yes.
So a lot of your listeners would appreciate what that means.
Yes.
Uh, they may not appreciate it, but they might think it's funny. But anyway, practice law. And then I moved into the charitable world, charitable foundation world, helping people with some of their charitable tax issues. And then I got into family business consulting work, much like you do. But I began working with David Green and the Hobby Lobby family about 20 years ago. And it was fascinating to work with them and just watch the progression. If you follow their family lineage, they're now into the sixth generation of their family, although the first two generations were not business people, they weren't wealthy. It wasn't until the third generation that David Green started Hobby Lobby, and he was the only one of his family that went into business. But as I've worked with families and worked with that family in particular, one of the observations that I've made in working with families is this notion that legacy is what we leave behind. And
Mhm.
that's kind of a popular adage, even. And with the Hobby Lobby family in particular, that wasn't their mindset because their mindset was, hey, if all we do is leave money behind, we've failed. And so the notion really was, how can we have a different perspective of legacy? And so in the book, we talked about legacy as what we set in motion. And
Yes.
that's really the main purpose of the book is legacy is what we're setting in motion for future generations. And of course, if you're a family of faith, it's not just generations on this earth, it's generations up ahead in heaven. And that's the mindset of not only the Hobby Lobby family, but so many of the families that we work with. And when you take that kind of perspective, is that we're setting something in motion, it puts a different responsibility on me because it means I really do have a responsibility to set something that's going to last for generations. The leave behind thing, frankly, is easy because it's kind of like, they can figure it out. And if they can't, tough luck.
Yes.
And I've definitely seen that attitude of people that have that kind of mindset.
That's true. It's much appreciated. And what I want to propose for the time for today is let's build a bridge, because what you pointed out, and it is what I often also experience, is there are so many misconceptions. What is a legacy? And there are so many legacy advisors. And in the end of the day, the individuals and the families are often come to the result, yeah, legacy is what we leave behind, right? And very few people are very intentionally focused. What is the thing what we want to set in motion? Also, in the next generation, they come. And if we walk over the bridge, can you give us just, let's call it principles? what are the main principles of an legacy, what set things in motion? Are there certain principles, what you have figured out also with the Hobby Lobby family, but also through your career as a family business advisor?
Yeah, first, if you take a step back, is the one of the things that we try to say to people is that the notion of family is there's a historical perspective of family, there's a sociological perspective, and we believe a biblical perspective or a perspective of faith. And they all, frankly, agree with one another. So one of the first big principles that we talk about is the idea is that the intent around family truly is a generational perspective
Yes.
because nobody historically, sociologically, or from a faith perspective sets out to have kids and say, gosh, I'd like to ruin them. I've spoken to thousands of people in different parts of the world, and sometimes I'll start that question. I said, how many of you would like to have a great family? How many of you'd like to belong? And how many of you would like to have purpose and meaning? And everybody raises their hands. And then I'll flip it around and say, now, how many of you would love to have a family that's just a wreck and just a mess? And nobody raises their hand. And so if you just start with that perspective, again, whether you're a person of faith or not, everybody wants to have a life of purpose and meaning and significance. And accordingly, they want to belong to a community. The first community is family, and they want that to continue. And how do they want it to continue? James Hughes, as you know, in his book, does ask a great question. He says, can a family's wealth last for 100 years?
Yeah.
And of course, we define wealth in that broader framework that it's the intellectual, social, emotional, spiritual, and financial capital. And of course, he answers the question and says, yes, we can. And what's the core? You've got to have a clear vision, mission, set of values in order for it to last 100 years. And then on top of that, and we write about this in the book, is that you've got to navigate your conflict well.
Yes.
Because conflict is inevitable. So we say that at a minimum, you've got to have a code of conduct. And when we say a code of conduct, we don't mean an ethic, an aspirational thing. We actually talk about the idea that you got to have rules of behavior. Some of those simple rules are things like don't gossip. If I have a problem with you, I come to you. I go straight to the source. And I don't raise my tone. I attempt to really listen and understand. So we talk about that code of conduct, and then we talk about a process by which you manage your conflict, and then, of course, a regular set of family meetings, whatever those look like. So those are the basics. I know that sounds really simple, but families that have clear vision, mission, values, code of conduct, and a conflict process, and then a forum by which they meet regularly have a good chance of succeeding from generation to generation.
What I much like in the book is, and you pointed it out, that we live in an area of short-term thinking. And also, I often mention this in several discussions, and I raised the question: is a 100-year time horizon thinking? Is this just the right thinking? Because longevity-wise, we will live longer, and probably you and I, maybe we can become lucky, and we will achieve the 100-year. And what I found fascinating in the book was that you mentioned, why not a 500-year lens, generational wise, and on a legacy? And you mentioned it also in regards of the Bible. All the scriptures don't talk about 10 or 30 or 50 or 100 years. They talk about maybe in 1,000 generations. The covenant described this very clearly. what is from your experience the great burden or the great wall that very few people are bold to think over the horizon and raise the question, can we plan or structure our legacy as a North Star for us as a family for 500 years, probably for 1,000 years? Is it just they are not both enough, or what are the missing things from your experience?
Well, one of the things is culturally, we have allowed ourselves to slip into this mindset of short-term thinking. Certainly, in the financial planning world, we have driven this idea that we need to save for retirement, and
Mhm.
retirement's the goal. And of course, we say that the misnomer around retirement is that you're going to save all that you can so that you can sit on your can. It's, I'm going to save for 30 years, go retire and sit on a beach. And that kind of mindset of that my goal is comfort is really a wrong mindset from my perspective.
Yes.
Because if the idea truly is, hey, I've been entrusted with something, a family and this family wealth, and really all the intellect and the knowledge and the values and principles, why wouldn't I want that to continue? Because if I want to be part of a thriving community, a thriving family, then man, I would work to want to sustain that. And if we cast the vision around every family, sometimes I'll show the perspective of that our mindset has become very singular. And the idea is that, man, it's all about me and just rising up to be who I am. But if the goal is, man, we want to be an interdependent family, this is my model here, an interdependent family with all these values and principles, and that family can continue to grow from generation to generation, man, we make the world a better place. And that's the idea. And so, from a historical and sociological perspective, you see families and cultures that sustain themselves. And on the other hand, we also know from the rise and fall of nations kind of thinking that families rise and families fall, nations rise, nations fall. And typically, the end of every society is when we get singular in focus. And it's only when we reset to the idea of family and community as the bigger idea that we do that. You mentioned the idea of what we see in the Bible. If you go back and if you got like a Bible app on your phone and hit the search bar and you just type in the word generations, you'll see that the word generations, depending on which particular translation, that word comes up like 350 times.
Mhm.
So it's a repeated idea. And so, of course, many societies of the world would trace their history to Abraham, Father Abraham, as the song would go. Well, when you go back and you look at the Bible, you'll see that the promise to Abraham is not just a promise to Abraham. Abraham, you're such a cool dude and you're so smart and intelligent. And look at all these wonderful skills you have. It wasn't that. The promise to Abraham was to his children and to his descendants and to the generations to come. And the Bible says that Abraham believed God. He believed, in fact, that he would extend to the generations. One of the really neat passages of scripture is in Genesis 15. And by that time, by the way, Abraham, again, we can build him up to be a mythical guy. But the bottom line is that he'd left his homeland. There's some argument about, the nature of his family and the family values. But he was called out to this place where God said, I'm going to give you land, people, and blessings. But he doesn't have a son. And then he separates from his nephew, who'd really he probably raised and helped be part of his life. And I think Abraham was pretty discouraged. But in Genesis 15, God takes Abraham outside and he says, Abraham, look up at the stars. That's what your family's going to be like. And he gives him a vision. So if there was a short vision state for Abraham and his family, it would be something like the stars. And I suspect that Abraham never went out to a night sky and looked up ever again and thought differently about those stars. And again, the Bible says that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. But it's this idea that my descendants would continue to be a blessing to the world around them. And that's the perspective that I believe we need to cast that kind of vision for the families that we work with around the world, is that they would be a generational blessing, because when they continue to grow and expand their influence, their values, their giving, man, we change the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what a beautiful picture what you have painted over the last couple of minutes. And if I argue, I mean, everybody is talking about these $100 trillion wealth transfer today, right? But the whole world is only talking about the money, and very few people address the families behind these large sum of money. But on the flip side of this is just, that is just my observation, that we should find a new definition. What is actually a family? Structure-wise, gender-wise, and stuff like that. I would say that is not bad. That gives us just the opportunity to consider, is it just in this kind of generation, in the next generation there will come, that we have a new approach on legacy? Because on the other end, these families have a lot of power in their hands, financial capital. They can change a lot for the good things, but also probably for the bad things. Do you follow my observation that we should bring mainly this kind of message? Legacy is what you set in motion to the new generation of families? Because what I often experience is just these traditional wise, and I won't blame them. It was just a part of teaching them, or the wrong ways, stuff like that. But the new generation is just more open, and they have an attitude and an behavior to change something over generations. But often they lack just, okay, how I can structure my own legacy as an individual, and what can I build structure-wise as a legacy for my family, if the family is not the same what I have experienced at my parenthood, right? Do you see some fights, some tensions between the elders and the new generation when it comes to legacy? And the question is how we can solve these tensions, or maybe also conflicts.
Yeah, one of the things that's going on, of course, and we reference this in the book, but let me drive it home a little more clear, is there are really two worldviews that are going on today around what's the family. And the majority of well, there's a good part of the world that's really shifting towards an individualistic view of family. And the idea is that family's real job is to raise me up so I can be fully independent, stand on my own 2 feet, self-actualize, experience my identity and purpose, blah, blah, blah. You can kind of reiterate that. And that individualistic view of family means that I'm more important than the family. It's me is more important than the we. And if we call that out as a group of advisors and as families, is say, let's recognize this highly individualistic view of family that's going on today, and the goal is independence, then we'll at least recognize what we're fighting with. Because as you appreciate, America is probably the most hyper individualistic country in the world, Great Britain, Canada, but a lot of Europe is becoming very individualistic as well, but they don't even know it.
Yes.
The other worldview, if you will, is a collectivist worldview. And historically, a lot of Europe has been collectivist, and that the idea really is that families, a team, we're meant to be interdependent. We derive our identity from family. Where we live, where we come from is very important. Italy historically has been a collectivist kind of country. Middle Eastern countries, Asian countries, Latin American countries, very collectivist in nature. And that idea is that we raise our kids up to be part of the team. And so that perspective really helps guide us. But that's the tension point that we're experiencing. What about me versus what about the
Yes.
we?
Yes.
And so if we, as a group of advisors and family, recognize, I've worked obviously with families that start with this very hyper individualistic viewpoint. But if you have them agree with the perspective is that, hey, what's our goal? Is it just to raise up a group of individuals that go off and do their thing? Nobody ever agrees with that. The idea is that we would like our family at some level to have shared values and a shared set of virtues that we live out. The money is just part of it.
Yes.
In fact, the money is actually creates part of the problem because it creates that independence. And so, I mean, I worked with one family where they'd pass on so much money to the kids didn't have to come back. They didn't need to. In fact, their attitude was like, why should I? Why should I come sit at the table? And they didn't want to.
I mean, I'm completely with you, and it brings me to the question. I guess you have described this a little bit also in the book. For me personally, the family of affinity is just the future type of the family. On different reasons, we will face in the next century will be on declining birth rates. Every family, excluding Africa, will face these challenge. And the question is more, okay, if you have a large fortune on the one hand, it's just, okay, what can we do to preserve the family? And exactly what you described on this example, if you have kids and the kids say, yeah, give me just the money and I will jump out. I do my own thing, right? But the challenges will be the same. I mean, there also will be confronted, okay, what is the thing, what I can set in motion on my path? And what kind of people can I bring in the boat that I can share my mission, my vision with them, and that we can change things on a broader scale, or stuff like that. The legacy itself is just, for me, also a driving force. But if it's just planned in the right direction, not from the past, but from the future. And that is what I often experience. Very few people have a clear idea, okay, what is actually my purpose of life? Because legacy itself starts first on my end, not on the whole family structure. But if I have it just kids and the spouse or stuff like that, the question is, can you give us just on an example, how do you guide families to this process? How do you help each individual family member to figure out, okay, what is actually my North Star? I don't call it just mission. What is just my North Star? What gives me the direction through my life? What is the process that the listeners and the viewers have an idea how I can structure my own legacy?
Yeah. The short version of it is in the consulting process that we engage in, there's 5 steps. But the first step is always discovery, and the second step is communication. The third step is alignment. The fourth step is implementing. And the fifth is celebration, which, as an aside, I don't want to forget that one. So oftentimes we forget to celebrate. We made progress. We
Yeah,
got a little better.
yeah,
But the discovery process is really where a lot of that starts. And so the number one thing that you're trying to do in the discovery process is actually work on the worldview. What's the purpose of family? So you raised this question earlier, but we try to help them redefine family. And so we start with the definition of saying family's the first institution that gets established in the world, not government, not business. So if we start with that viewpoint, family is the first institution whose job is to teach values, to preserve culture, to impact generations. Then, if we get a common definition and a common worldview around family, that's the first thing to start with. Because there's maybe been a couple times in the history of the world where we see societies that have common language. And the societies that have a common language can do anything. They can accomplish anything, and they can do it for a good purpose. So, common language is really the first starting point with a common worldview. But from there, we engage in some of the typical things that you would appreciate, which is we're going to help people understand some things around personalities inside the families, understanding strengths, communication styles, apology styles, all of that built around trying to establish their own individual identity. And I think the missing point that you really appreciate that so many in my point of view, consulting firms stop with that. And I think that's a good place, but it's not enough because then you got to actually work on the family story. What's the larger narrative that you're part of?
Mhm.
Because your identity by itself
Mhm.
only matters if it's part of a larger narrative. And so we try to dig into actually family genealogy, family history. Where have you been? And then, frankly, even looking at some of the societal issues, where does your family fit within this culture? What have you been collectively called to? Not just individually, but
Mhm.
collectively. And the idea that, well, maybe our family is supposed to be part of XYZ, but building upon the narrative, not just, oh, I got an idea and boom, off we go.
Yeah.
So that the power of saying, man, I have been part of something and I will be part of something in the future is something really powerful. I don't think it's, I think sometimes we make the mistake of just trying to identify or build our identity around this. Here I am, look at me, I'm so unique.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I have maybe an interesting question. What pops up in my mind if you have described this? Have you seen through this process what you have done with families that you have opened a door for them that they have considered, okay, what about we can become a dynasty? We have never considered before this, right? But with this new and fresh perspective, it is possible for us. And in the end, why not? Right? Have you experienced something like this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think about one family in particular where when the dad in particular, got a hold of this generational vision, his wife bought in it too. Now, by the way, they were very much in it together, but uh, I remember hearing him talk about how he'd been talking to one of his friends who also had some generational wealth, and the guy was kind of talking about the estate plan and that kind of stuff and talking about his kids. And the guy just kind of laughs and he says, "I don't know what you're talking about." He says, I'm thinking about the next 150 years." And so he was laughing at the guy a little bit because he's thinking too small. He
Yeah,
says, "I'm
yeah,
really trying to plan for the next 150 years." He says,
yeah.
"I'm working on a 150-year legacy." And the other thing that was really fascinating to me is in the past, they'd had some assets that they were thinking would be part of the inheritance, but they were looking at the assets differently. They weren't looking at them as part of an inheritance, a financial inheritance, but they were looking at those assets as a base by which they could allow the family to continue to grow and thrive.
Yeah, I mean, it's just in the end of the day, it's just a matter if you want to survive as a family, you must scale, right? Otherwise, you will gone. And and I'm every time fascinated by, I don't know whether do you have heard this, from the 1,000-year family plan from the 𝐘𝐸𝐬𝐬 family in Hong Kong. I mean, the Asian families, they have, I would say they're a little bit more closer to these long-term thinking in regards of legacy as many Western families from the Western part of the world. But what I've figured out is if you have just, you call it just a strong narrative over generations, that is just like a magnet for each family member to say, yeah, I want to be part of it. And if I have also the responsibility, the duty, and the obligation to create something on this journey toward, and I can scale it up, that is just also just the heart of bringing a family together as a strong, resilient powerhouse, right?
Right.
And that is also, from my perspective, necessary that we bring these fresh perspective, or in other words, the correct definition, what is actually a legacy, and why you should have this definition that you set something in motion. But first, what is your definition? What you want to set in motion? Not your assets, not your deals, not your family office, stuff like that. No, tell me, what is the thing, if you have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, what is the thing, what you have set in motion today, right? And, but in many cases, that is just hard work, I would say, right? Because
Yeah. And you mentioned that the Asian family, they tend to have a collectivist view of family, but this individualistic view has slipped in. And how do we know that? It's because they built some really successful businesses, but they got one kid, or maybe they
absolutely,
got two kids.
yes,
And so they don't have a recruiting pool that they can reach into and say, come be part of this. Now, I by no means am saying that every kid should be part of the family business. But you know that one of the challenges that we have today is that so many of the families that we work with, we're not talking about a big pool of kids that we get to reach into and say, you're going to be part of the leadership, even as shareholders. And so, I mean, sometimes we're actually missing the window of recruiting and developing good shareholders, people who could be part of a family board.
yes,
So part of our job sometimes is putting in place a structure that would allow the family to govern itself in absence of family leaders in the business, in absence of family shareholders, planning for maybe the grandkids or the great grandkids to be able to step in and allowing a system that would allow them to come in. And that to me is one of the shocking things right now. I mean, there are a couple families that I'm working with right now where I know that we're planning not for the kids to be involved, but we might be able to get the grandkids or great grandkids involved in the future. And again, I'm not trying to say again that the participation in the family business is the ultimate, but there is some reality that if we're gonna keep intact some of this, that we've got to have somebody involved at some level.
absolutely, absolutely with you. And I mean, from my perspective, it comes back to the question, do you have an attractive legacy that you can have it, that this kind of legacy can attract third party non-family members or new family members to your family of affinity that you can scale over the next generation. And I had this experience with a couple, very successful family business, and no children. And they stand now for the challenge to say, what can we do that our family business and each employee will be our new family, and each employee will our family member. And the principal said, yeah, that is not too easy, because an employee can say, okay, I will go tomorrow to another enterprise. And it comes back in every discussion, okay, what is the legacy and how we structure a legacy well. And once again, from my perspective, it starts, and you have confirmed this, it starts with my own. What is my purpose, and what is the thing what I can set in motion, and what is greater as I am, right? Not the money, but what is the thing what we can change as a family over generations?
Yeah. And I'd like to say, I mean, you are really nailing it, which is if we help everybody see that there's a bigger purpose, a bigger narrative that they're part of, they'll be wanting to say, let me in. I want to be
Yes,
part of that. I want to
yes,
get on that ship. It's kind of like if I said, hey, why don't we go on this great grand cruise around the world? You'd
right,
be like, yeah, and you're paying for me? Sure.
yeah,
I want to be part of that. But I do want to, because I know we don't have forever on this call, is there is an important chapter in the book to me that's we titled The Broken Legacy,
mhm,
because certainly we'll have people that would be listening to this discussion between you and I, and they're like, man, I missed that ship, and my kids are a wreck, and I don't know what I'm going to do, or my grandkids, it's just a mess. And so, how do I put the proverbial toothpaste back in the tube? And the short answer is, I just say to them, man, it's never too late.
yes,
So don't give up. Even though it might seem hard, but if you have a generational perspective, you'll recognize that it's okay, because sometimes the work that you're going to do now might be simply just to create curiosity among your kids or grandkids, with the idea being that if you put in place a structure, then you can actually see redemption and restoration into the coming generations. And so we see those stories. We see the stories of historical families, the Congo Gumi family and the Japanese family. You'll see they made all kinds of adaptations over the years, where sometimes they had to have the daughter-in-law, step in and lead, which historically wouldn't happen. So families adapt. And that's part of the idea is, if it seems a mess now, don't quit, don't give up. It's worth fighting for, and you need to have that mindset. And because certainly I come from the faith kind of side of things, I believe that God's perspective is always one of redemption and restoration. And throughout the Bible, you see all these stories that make no sense whatsoever. But if you actually follow the scriptural story, you'll see later on that, like, whoa, that got redeemed. I wonder how that happened. And it's really, really good when that happens. But if we have that generational mindset, then it changes everything.
absolutely. And let me add that thought. All of these experience examples wasn't focused on the money. They was focused on the family, right?
Right.
On the human and intellectual capital side. And that is, in I say this also in many discussions, all the great examples are there. And from my perspective, we live in an area that we can build new examples, right? We have all the knowledge. We know exactly how these 1,000-year families, what they have done, and we can adapt this. That was impossible, I would say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That was just in the dark. Nobody was knowing actually what these families are doing. And that is what I want to encourage everybody who is listening and watching. Consider. I mean, you can build up a dynasty. It is possible today. And there's a great benefit for you, but also for your kids and the grandkids and all these potentially new family members. Before we jump out, I will close our session just maybe it's a challenge for you. if you can imagine that you and I, we have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, what is your perspective if you look backward? What should be changed, or what would be different in 500 years from now? Do you see more dynasties? Do you see more families with a great narrative, with very proper structured legacy? What is your view, and what should be changed?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful kind of question, the idea of looking back 500 years from now. And I would say that if we reset our view of family, that family really is meant to be this interdependent, multi-generational kind of institution. If we reset it, then the opportunity 500 years from now is that we'll see a whole set of family lines, whether it's the High family or the Smith family, the Rockefeller family, whatever family names you want to pick around the world. And we'll look and we'll say, from a historical perspective, man, that family, they impacted that part of the world, or that family, they did that. And look at how they thrived as individuals, too. There were doctors and lawyers and people who cured cancer. And so that's my view, is that because we put in place a different worldview and then a different structure, we'll see family lines that will thrive as opposed to us trying to having to look for them. Who are the great families of the world? In the future, 500 years from now, we'll say, man, the great families of the world, look at them. See all that God accomplished through those families. And
Right.
so to me, that's a really powerful vision, is that we'll be able to name those families. And they did this and they did that. And look at all the good that they did in the world and the lives that they impacted and the communities that they changed in big and small ways. And that to me is a really compelling and powerful 500 you. Of course, you and I won't be around, but that's what we'd like to put in
maybe
place.
maybe we are reincarnate, and we will meet us. Probably, I don't know. We will see.
Yes.
So it was my pleasure, Bill, and it's just it gives me just also the courage to put more effort on these legacy thing, right? Because in the end of the day, that's just the heart, right? That more families will have a very strong, powerful legacy for the future, for them, but also for us as a society, because every society needs these strong, resilient families, and no society have any benefit if these families are disappear on tensions, on conflicts, and through the wealth transfer itself, and that should be also our duty and obligation and responsibility to help more families on this journey. So
Yep.
it
You've
was
got
my
that right.
pleasure, Bill. Many
Yep.
thanks.
Very good. Thanks for being on.